In the preceding video, we took a look at the concept of default parameter values. Here we have an almost identical function to the one that we presented in the preceding video. In this case, however, you'll notice on this first line here that I've removed the default parameter values. Now, what I'm about to show you is the concept of keyword arguments, and the concepts of keyword arguments can also be combined with the concepts of default parameter values as well, which is extremely common in Python development. So here we have a rectangle area function that expects to receive a length parameter and a width parameter. So I pre-typed this before I started recording this video. Let me go ahead and execute that snippet to define the function. Now, in Python, you can always use a parameter's name to pass the corresponding argument into the function. So I could go and say rectangle area, and I can do let's say length equals 10 and width equals 3, just for argument's sake here. And in this case, I happen to be passing the parameters in the same order that they are specified in the parameter list. So as you would expect, you get the correct result from the function defined up above. However, I can also modify this, and I can pass the keyword arguments in any order I want. So I can say width equals, let's do 2 just to make it different, and length equals 10. And of course, width times length, or length times width, is going to be 20 in this case. The Python interpreter will automatically pass each of these two values to the correct parameter in the function definition, because we are specifying the same names. You have to use the same names as the actual parameters in the function's definition. So as you can see here, it does indeed still enable me to pass in those arguments correctly and get the correct result. Now let me go ahead and just recall the definition that we did here, and you may remember from the preceding video that we had specified default parameter values for the length and the width. So let's go ahead and do that again here. This time I'll use 1 for the length and 1 for the width. So by default, if I call rectangle area with no arguments, I'm going to get a area of 1 for this rectangle function, or rectangle area function, excuse me. So we'll redefine the rectangle area function, and just to show you that we can call it with no arguments, let's do that, and you can see the default 1 times 1 gives me 1 as the result. Now, once I combine the concepts of keyword arguments and default parameter values, I can do things like invoke the rectangle area function with only the second argument. So I can say width equals 20, and now I'm going to calculate 1 times 20 because I'm passing in 20 for the second argument, and I didn't specify length's value, but it does have a default value associated with it. So you can see now we're able to combine the two concepts, and of course you can also pass in only the length as well if you would like. So I could say length equals 10, and it will use width of 1 in that particular case. Now, for those of you who are coming from other programming languages where you might define a set of functions that all have the same name but maybe have different numbers of arguments or different types of arguments, in Python it's commonly the case that all such functions would be implemented as a single function that has lots of different parameters and lots of different possible default values for those parameters. So you will see sometimes functions with large numbers of parameters in their parameter lists, and then you'll wind up giving your users the flexibility of calling those functions a number of different ways. Now, in most of the examples that we write, we will not define functions that have large numbers of parameters. However, you will see many examples of functions that we call that have many more parameters than we actually wind up using in our code, and I'll talk more about those issues as we encounter them. Now, there's one other thing I want to mention about default parameter values in Python. When you have a parameter list in which you have parameters that don't have default arguments, those parameters must be the first parameters in the parameter list. So let me recall the definition one more time. And if in fact I wanted to require the length to always be passed, but allow somebody to specify nothing for the width, in which case we would get the default value 1, we would have to write the parameter list this way, with the required arguments first and the optional arguments last.